What if one moment of kindness to a stranger revealed a truth so shocking that it changed your entire understanding of your past? This is the story of a wealthy, lonely man, a grieving daughter, and a secret buried in time. Before we get down to business, we want to hear your opinion. Write to us in the comments, what is your name and from which city are you watching us? Your support is very important to us. We will be grateful if you like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for participating with us in this important project. James Whitmore was the epitome of success. A self-made millionaire, he had carved out an empire from nothing, earning the respect and envy of those around him. His towering mansion sat on a lush estate, adorned with opulence, marble floors, priceless artwork, and views that stretched to the horizon. Yet, beneath the gilded surface, James was a hollow man. Since the death of his beloved wife, Helen, a decade ago, life had lost its luster. Helen had been his guiding light, her warmth and laughter filling every corner of his existence. Without her, the world seemed colder, emptier. James poured himself into his work, amassing wealth that brought him no joy. His days were mechanical, his nights plagued by loneliness. Every room in the mansion bore memories of Helen. Her favorite armchair, untouched for years, sat in the corner of the study. The garden she once lovingly tended had grown wild, a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured lawns surrounding it. Even the kitchen, where she would hum as she cooked, was now just a sterile space overseen by staff. James had friends and acquaintances, but their interactions were transactional. His success had made him untouchable, revered but not understood. He rarely ventured out for leisure, his life a monotonous cycle of work, charity galas, and solitary evenings. On one of those rare nights, he decided to treat himself to dinner at an upscale restaurant, a place Helen had loved. As he dined alone, the chatter and laughter of other patrons only deepened his sense of isolation. When the meal was done, James exited the restaurant, intending to return to his empty home. That's when he saw her, a young black woman, sitting on the curb, holding a child. Her clothes were clean but threadbare, and her face bore the weariness of someone who had weathered too many storms. Despite her exhaustion, her posture was proud, her gaze steady. She cradled her son protectively, her free hand outstretched hesitantly. James paused, struck by the scene. In his world of luxury, it was easy to forget the struggles of others. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 4 $100 bills, placing them in her hand without a word. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and James saw something there that unsettled him, a strength that mirrored Helen's, tempered by pain. He nodded and walked away, the image of her etched in his mind. As his car pulled away from the curb, he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had been more significant than he realized. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, James felt a strange flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense that life, however bleak, still held surprises. What he didn't know was how profoundly this chance meeting would unravel the shadows of his past. The next morning, the air was crisp and the sky cloudless as James drove to the cemetery. Visiting Helen's grave was a ritual he hadn't missed in 10 years. It was his only connection to her, the one place where he could speak his thoughts aloud and imagine she was listening. As he stepped out of his car and onto the soft gravel path, he clutched a bouquet of her favorite lilies. The cemetery was peaceful, the silence broken only by the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the wind. When he reached Helen's gravestone, James stopped short. Someone else was there. It was the woman from the night before. She knelt by Helen's grave, her head bowed, her son seated quietly beside her, tracing shapes in the dirt. The sight of her in such an intimate, sacred place sent a shock through James. How could she possibly be here? Clearing his throat, James stepped forward cautiously. "Excuse me," he began, his voice measured but firm. "Why are you here? How do you know this woman?" The young woman looked up, startled. Her face was a blend of apprehension and defiance, her posture tense as though bracing for judgment. Slowly, she stood, clutching her son's hand. "I'm sorry if I'm intruding," she said carefully, her voice steady despite her evident discomfort. "But this is my mother's grave." James froze, the bouquet slipping slightly in his grip. "What did you say?" Her gaze met his directly, unwavering. "Helen Whitmore was my mother." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to process. James's mind raced, searching for meaning in her statement. Helen had never mentioned having a daughter, let alone a black daughter. "That can't be true," James said, shaking his head. His voice wavered, tinged with confusion and disbelief. "Helen, she never told me. I didn't know until recently myself," the young woman admitted, her expression softening as she looked down at her son. "I found out through old documents my grandparents kept. She had me when she was very young. She gave me up." James's breath caught in his throat. A swirl of emotions welled within him, anger, betrayal, sadness. Helen had kept a secret this monumental from him, a part of her life she had buried so deeply it was as though it had never existed. The woman spoke again, her voice tinged with the vulnerability of someone exposing an old wound. "My name is Maya. I've been searching for answers for a long time. When I found out about her, I wanted to know who she was, what kind of person she was. I came here to find some piece of her, something to understand." James's eyes flicked between Maya and the gravestone, his mind struggling to reconcile the love he had for Helen with this staggering revelation. Maya's face held traces of Helen, her eyes, her determined expression, her resilience. The little boy at Maya's side tugged on her hand. "Mommy, are we going to see Grandma Helen?" he asked innocently. Maya knelt down, stroking his hair. "We're already here, sweetheart," she said softly. James watched the scene unfold, his heart aching. A part of him wanted to walk away, to preserve the image of Helen he had held onto for so long. But another part of him, stronger, more insistent, compelled him to stay. For better or worse, his life had just changed forever. James sat across from Maya in a quiet corner of the cemetery, the early autumn sun casting long shadows over the stone markers. Between them sat a silence so thick it felt almost tangible, filled with the unspoken weight of everything Maya had just revealed. Helen, his Helen, had a secret child. A daughter she had kept hidden for decades, a child she had given away. James's mind swirled with emotions, betrayal, sorrow, and a simmering anger he couldn't yet direct. How did you find out about her?" he asked finally, his voice breaking the stillness. Maya shifted uncomfortably, her hands tightening around her son's small fingers. "I grew up in foster care," she began, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I always knew I was adopted, but my foster parents didn't know much about my birth family. It wasn't until last year, after my adoptive mother passed, that I went searching. I found some papers, hospital records and an old birth certificate, hidden in a box at my grandparents' house." She paused, glancing at her son, who had begun to fidget with a tuft of grass by the edge of the bench. "When I saw the name Helen Whitmore listed as my mother, I was shocked. I knew that name, I'd read articles about her. She was an accomplished woman, married to a successful man. I couldn't believe it." James inhaled sharply, the familiar pang of grief mixing with the sting of betrayal. "She never told me. Not once." "Why wouldn't she?" Maya interrupted gently, her voice firm but tinged with understanding. "Because I wasn't part of the life she built with you. My birth father, he was black. Helen must have known what raising a biracial child in her world would mean. The stigma, the challenges, maybe she thought she was sparing me." Her words hung in the air, and James felt his anger begin to shift. It wasn't directed at Maya, or even at her son. It was directed at Helen, or rather, the society that had driven her to such a heartbreaking decision. "She gave you away," James said softly, struggling to comprehend. But why come here? Why now? Maya's gaze hardened, her composure faltering. Because I had to know. I needed to see who my mother was. And then I found her here, too late to ask her myself. Her voice cracked, and James saw the pain she had carried for so long. The loss of a mother she never knew, the unanswered questions, and the search for an identity rooted in a truth that had been hidden from her. The boy tugged on Maya's sleeve. "Mommy, who is he?" he asked, pointing to James. Maya hesitated, her eyes meeting James's. There was something unspoken, a shared understanding forming between them. "This is Mr. Whitmore," she said finally. He knew Grandma Helen. The words felt strange to James, almost surreal. The child calling Helen Grandma was a reminder of the familial ties he hadn't known existed until today. James looked at the boy, then back at Maya. "You're her daughter," he said slowly, the realization sinking in. "Which means, you're my family, too." It wasn't an acceptance, not yet. But it was a step toward something neither of them fully understood yet, something they would have to navigate together. For the first time in a decade, James felt the faintest spark of purpose. His life had been shaken, yes. But maybe, just maybe, it had also been given a chance to begin anew. James sat at his kitchen table later that evening, the memory of the encounter with Maya replaying in his mind like a film he couldn't stop watching. The shock of her story had worn off slightly, replaced by a simmering determination. The revelation of Helen's hidden past had created a chasm in his understanding of her, but it also presented an opportunity to rebuild, if not with her, then with the daughter she had left behind. The next day, James called Maya, asking her to meet him at a small cafe in town. She hesitated, her voice guarded, but she eventually agreed. When she arrived, her son trailing behind her, James noticed the fatigue etched in her features. Life had not been kind to Maya, and yet she carried herself with quiet strength. "I've been thinking about what you told me," James began, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. "About Helen, about you, and about what all of this means." Maya nodded cautiously, her hands clasped around her coffee mug. "And?" James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I want to help you, Maya. Not just with money, but in a real, meaningful way. If Helen couldn't be there for you, then maybe I can." The offer hung in the air, heavy with implications. Maya's expression flickered with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would you care? You didn't know I existed until yesterday." James leaned forward, his eyes sincere. "Because you're part of her, and now, part of me. And because, if Helen kept you a secret out of fear or shame, then that's something I need to help undo. For her memory. For you. For your son." Maya blinked rapidly, the walls she had built around her heart visibly starting to crack. But there was still hesitation. "I don't need a savior," she said quietly. "I've made it this far on my own." James nodded, respecting her pride. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a connection. A family. For both of us." The conversation shifted to practical matters. James asked about Maya's life, her struggles, her dreams. She spoke of the instability of foster care, the challenges of being a single mother, and her attempts to balance odd jobs to make ends meet. She also mentioned that she had tracked down her biological father a few months prior, hoping to find some semblance of family, only to discover he was an alcoholic with no interest in reconnecting. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support. James's jaw tightened at the mention of Maya's father. "If he won't step up, then I will," he said firmly. "You're my family now, and so is your son." Maya's defenses finally began to lower. For the first time, she saw in James not just a wealthy man with resources, but someone who genuinely wanted to bridge the divide that years of secrets and pain had created. She saw a man who was as lonely as she was, searching for meaning in the wake of loss. Over the next few weeks, James threw himself into helping Maya rebuild her life. He set up a trust fund for her son, ensured she had stable housing, and introduced her to connections that could help her secure a stable job. But more importantly, he spent time with her, getting to know her as a person, not just as a link to Helen. As James and Maya grew closer, so did their understanding of Helen's choices and the pressure she had faced. They didn't excuse her actions, but they began to see her as a woman who had been shaped by the limitations of her time and the fear of losing the love she had found. Through their shared pain, they began to forge something new, a bond not born of blood, but of healing and hope. One evening, as Maya's son fell asleep on James's couch after a family dinner, Maya looked over at James, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." James smiled, the heaviness that had clung to him for years lifting just a little. "I think Helen would have wanted this," he said. "For us to find each other. To make something good out of everything she couldn't face." Maya nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Maybe she would have. For the first time in years, James felt like his life had purpose again. He wasn't just helping Maya and her son, he was rebuilding the family Helen had left behind, creating something beautiful out of the broken pieces of the past. The first rays of dawn crept through the windows of James's expansive home, casting a warm glow over the dining room table where Maya and her son were sharing breakfast with him. It was a scene of quiet simplicity, yet profoundly meaningful. The house, once a mausoleum to James's grief, was now filled with new energy, laughter, the occasional clatter of a spoon, and the soft hum of life starting anew. Maya had been living in a modest apartment James helped her secure, close enough for them to see each other often. Her son, little Marcus, had already taken to calling James Grandpa, a title that initially caught James off guard but soon brought an unexpected joy. As James poured more coffee into Maya's cup, he reflected on how much had changed in a matter of weeks. The echoes of loneliness that had haunted him for so long were fading, replaced by a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. But he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about building something sustainable for Maya and Marcus, a foundation of trust, love, and opportunity. Later that day, James took Maya and Marcus to the park, a place he had often avoided since Helen's death. It was where they used to take long walks, dreaming about the future they would build together. Now, as Marcus giggled while chasing ducks near the pond, James felt a pang of bittersweetness. He realized this was the future Helen never got to see but had, in some way, left behind. Sitting on a bench, James turned to Maya. "There's something I've been thinking about," he began. "I want you to be part of my will, but more than that, I want to ensure you and Marcus have everything you need to thrive, not just financially, but emotionally." Maya looked at him, her expression guarded but curious. "You've already done so much. I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage." "You're not," James said firmly. "You're my family now. I've spent years building a legacy with no one to share it with. What's the point of wealth if it doesn't create something lasting, something good?" Maya's eyes softened, but there was still a flicker of hesitation. "I've learned to depend on myself," she admitted. "It's hard to trust, but you've shown me that maybe I don't have to do it all alone anymore." As the weeks turned into months, James and Maya worked together to navigate the complexities of their new relationship. James took steps to formally adopt Marcus, a process that was met with both bureaucratic challenges and moments of joy as they realized what it meant for their growing bond. Maya, in turn, began to trust James more deeply, letting him into the parts of her life she had long kept hidden. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support. One afternoon, as they were sorting through old photo albums of Helen, Maya found a letter tucked behind one of the pages. It was addressed to James, written years before Helen's death. With trembling hands, James unfolded the yellowed paper and read the words aloud. "James, if you're reading this, it means I've kept secrets I couldn't face in life. I hope, more than anything, that you'll forgive me. I wanted to tell you about Maya, about the choice I made and the fear that drove me to it. But I was a coward, afraid of losing you and afraid of what the world would do to her. If she ever finds you, please do what I couldn't. Love her. Protect her. She deserves that. And so do you." Tears welled in both their eyes as the gravity of Helen's words settled over them. It was a moment of closure and a call to action. For James, it reaffirmed his commitment to Maya and Marcus. For Maya, it was a reminder that, despite her mother's failings, she had been loved in some quiet, unspoken way. Years later, the bond between James, Maya, and Marcus had transformed into something unbreakable. Marcus grew up with opportunities he could only dream of before, guided by James's wisdom and Maya's resilience. Together, they honored Helen's memory not by dwelling on the pain of the past but by building a future that reflected her hopes. On what would have been Helen's 50th birthday, James, Maya, and Marcus gathered at her gravesite. They stood together, hand in hand, the scars of their shared history a testament to the strength they had found in each other. As they left the cemetery, James looked at Maya, his voice steady. "Helen was right. You do deserve love. And so do I. Thank you for giving me that chance." Maya smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We gave each other a second chance. And we're making the most of it." And with that, they walked forward, 3 lives intertwined, a family forged not by blood but by choice, and bound by an unshakable resolve to face the world together.